Today, we're covering a story that's, well, it's incredibly difficult to hear, but it's one that is so important to remember. This is the story of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom and the unimaginable horror that stole their future. So let's go back. The place is Knoxville, Tennessee. The date is January 6, 2007. It's a cold Saturday night, the kind of winter chill that really gets into your bones. It was a night that started out with all the promise of any other weekend. For Channon and Chris, this was supposed to be a simple date night, just dinner and then off to a friend's birthday party. A night that should have been completely, totally ordinary. Let's just take a moment to get to know who they were. Channon Christian. She was 21 years old, a bright senior at the University of Tennessee, literally just months away from graduation. Friends said she was smart, warm, and just always smiling. And her boyfriend, Christopher Newsom. He was 23, a Knoxville local, a really talented carpenter, and he'd been a star pitcher for his high school baseball team. They were just two young people, Their entire lives were right there in front of them. This timeline here shows us their last known movements. Around 8 o'clock, Chris picks Channon up. A little before 9, they hit an ATM. At 9 p.m. sharp, Chris drops a buddy off at a party, tells him, "Hey, we'll be back soon." And then, just minutes later, they were gone. The timeline just stops cold. And that's when the nightmare begins. So, what on earth happened in those few moments, in a completely ordinary apartment parking lot, that could just change everything? Well, the answer is a horrifying, senseless act of violence, one that started with a single, devastating choice made by a group of predators. Because waiting there, unseen in the shadows, was a group of people. And they were about to take Channon and Chris to a little rental house on Chipman Street, a place that would become a scene of just unimaginable horror. And these are the 5 individuals responsible for what unfolded. You have Lamarcus Davidson, the ringleader, who had just gotten out of prison for carjacking, his half-brother Latalvis Covens, and Covens' girlfriend Vanessa Coleman. Along with them were George Thomas and Eric Boyd. They saw the couple, they saw the car, and they decided they wanted a whole lot more than just a vehicle. This was it. This was the moment their lives were shattered. At gunpoint, Channon and Chris were bound, gagged, and then shoved into the back seat of Channon's own SUV. They were driven to that house on Chipman Street, where the real nightmare was about to begin. So once they get them inside that house, the first thing they do, and this is just so calculated and cruel, is they separate them. Chris was dragged away from Channon into another room. His terrifying ordeal began immediately. What they did to Chris Newsom was methodical. It was monstrous. He was bound, gagged, and sexually assaulted. Then they marched him barefoot, in the freezing cold, to a set of railroad tracks nearby. They shot him in the neck and then in the back. But he was still alive, so they ended his life with an execution-style shot to his head, before setting his body on fire. While all of that was happening to Chris, Channon was still in the house. Her captors kept her alive. And you have to understand, this wasn't an act of mercy. It was the exact opposite. They kept her alive for the sole, sickening purpose of torturing her. Her suffering was their entertainment. For nearly 2 more days, Channon endured what you can only describe as hell on earth. She was repeatedly and brutally sexually assaulted by multiple men. They beat her, they kicked her, and in one final, depraved act, they forced her to drink bleach to try and erase their DNA. Finally, she was bound tightly and suffocated inside a trash can. And this just shows you the mindset we're dealing with. This is a line from the diary of Vanessa Coleman, one of the perpetrators. It was written during the time all this was happening. "Haha, I had fun." The absolute monstrous indifference in those 4 words, it's just chilling. So while Channon was still being held captive, the first piece of this horrifying puzzle was discovered, confirming the absolute worst fears of the Newsom family. On Sunday, the day after the abduction, a train worker discovered Chris's burned body lying by the tracks. He was identified through his fingerprints, and just like that, his family's world completely collapsed. Channon, at this point, was still officially a missing person. But on Monday, police got a tip, and they swarmed the house on Chipman Street. And what they found inside? It was a house of horrors. In the kitchen, they found Channon's body stuffed into 5 heavy-duty trash bags, all placed inside a garbage can. With the victims found and the perpetrators identified, the next chapter of this tragedy began. And it was a long one, a complex, grueling legal battle that would actually span more than a decade, just adding to the family's suffering. It took years. We're talking trials, retrials because of judicial misconduct, numerous appeals, but after all of that, this is where the justice system landed. Davidson, Cobbins, and Thomas all got life without parole. Vanessa Coleman was convicted of facilitating the crimes. She received 53 years. And Eric Boyd, he was the last one tried, and he was sentenced to life plus 90 years. So, justice in a legal sense was served. But the story doesn't end there. The other crucial part is how we remember Channon and Chris. What's the real legacy of a case this horrific? Well, it's so important that we are crystal clear about what this was. This was never, ever just a carjacking that went wrong. It wasn't a simple robbery. This was a prolonged, sadistic, calculated act of pure evil. And that right there, that is exactly why we tell their story. We recount these horrifying details, not for shock value, but to make sure the truth of what really happened to them is never, ever sugar-coated. We tell it so that Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom are never forgotten, so that their names are remembered for the beautiful lives they lived, not just the monstrous way they died. And we tell their story to remind ourselves and to remind the world of a terrible and undeniable truth. This actually happened. 2 bright, wonderful young lives were just extinguished by an act of absolute evil. And that is a reality we must never, ever look away from.